John Stockton and Karl Malone formed the quintessential NBA tandem. The Utah Jazz drafted Stockton 16th in 1984, then watched him become a model point guard, steady handling the ball, clever distributing it, deadly accurate shooting it, and so annoying trying to take it from an opponent. Before Stockton's second season, Utah used the 13th pick on his ideal complement, Karl Malone. By himself, Malone was plenty capable of juking and jarring his way to boards and buckets. Engaged with Stockton's timely passes, Malone's offense became unstoppable. Stylish mailman dunks and forceful finishes, impossible to contain without fouling. Plus pick-and-pop jumpers that connected like clockwork. Each of these two boasts an overwhelming statistical profile. Stockton recorded more assists and more steals than anyone, ever. Malone scored more points than everyone but Kareem, made more free throws than everyone including Kareem, and gobbled an enormous volume of rebounds too. Their individual NBA accolades are absurd. Two people this rare, this special, this exquisitely compatible were mostly happy, mostly healthy teammates for 18 seasons and made the playoffs in all of those seasons. That's 18 legitimate cracks at winning a championship, and yet Stockton and Malone each retired without a ring. So what happened? What stopped this perfect pairing short of even one perfect year? In the late 80s, Utah's prior stars cleared the way for new ones. Adrian Dantley was traded. Darrell Griffith's career wound down because of injuries. And Utah's rascally legend of a head coach, Frank Layden, stepped aside to let a future coaching legend take over, Jerry Sloan. Stockton and Malone developed during this gradual transition, and they didn't make much noise in the playoffs, with one notable exception. In 1988, the LA Lakers were reigning champions, with 87 MVP Magic Johnson leading them to a league-best 62 wins. LA was the team to beat, and Utah almost beat them. This was a big year for the Jazz. Stockton became the full-time starter at point guard. The youngster led the league in assists for the first time and helped Malone's numbers improve enough to make his first ever All-Star team. With shot-blocking tower Mark Eaton at center, Utah played the league's most efficient defense and upset Clyde Drexler's Portland Trailblazers in the first round of the playoffs. Clyde would remember this. That set Utah up for a second-round matchup with these mighty Lakers. The Jazz made it a series. Stockton and Malone held their own against the league's best and actually stole one of the first two games in Los Angeles. By the time the best-of-7 series returned to LA, it was tied 2-2. Another road win in Game 5 could have set Utah up to clinch an incredible upset at home. Yes, it is common to call a Utah player a jazzman. Jazzman? Stockton and Malone both excelled in Game 5. The little guy in particular finished with 23 points, 24 assists, and 5 steals, including some big ones. Down 2 with a minute and change left, Stockton ended a frantic Lakers possession by pilfering AC Green's rebound, then raced up the floor to find Malone, who drew a foul. Malone bricked one important free throw, which I'm afraid is going to be a theme, but he made the second to pull within one. Then Stockton did it again. This time it was Magic himself whose pocket got picked. Stockton relayed a long outlet to the mailman, who sent home a thunderous dunk to put the Jazz up 1 with less than a minute to play. Michael Cooper's surprise clutch shot eventually put the Lakers back on top, but Utah still had chances, plural. Down 1 with 7 seconds left, a desperate Eaton threw the inbound pass away. But James Worthy missed one of his free throws, so the Jazz had a final chance down 2. This time, it was Stockton's turn to mess up. Under the pressure of a double team, Stockton couldn't get a pass or a shot off in time. They'd blown their chance. Utah tied it back up at home, but surrendered to the eventual champions because of an excellent Magic performance in Game 7. In 88-89, Sloan took over for Layden mid-season, and Stockton joined Malone for the first of so many All-Star games together. Eaton too. Utah won a best yet 51 games, but Don Nelson's Warriors absolutely smoked the Jazz in one of the most remarkable first-round upsets ever. A 7-seed swept a 2-seed. In Sloan's first full season, the Jazz rebroke their franchise record to reach 55 wins, but once again stared down a first-round upset. In a decisive Game 5 against the Phoenix Suns, Stockton and Malone kinda got outplayed by Kevin Johnson and Tom Chambers. After a crucial Stockton-Johnson jump ball, it was actually Eddie Johnson who put Phoenix up 1 with just over a minute left. And when Utah took the lead back, it was Eddie again who drilled a preposterous bank shot and one to put Phoenix up 2. The Stockton to Malone connection tied it, but Phoenix fired back. With Eaton off the floor against the small Suns lineup, Kevin Johnson attacked, drew help, dished off to little-used bench warmer Mike McGee, then got the ball back and hit a tough mid-range J just before the buzzer. Stockton's half-court prayer missed, and Utah had fallen once again in the first round. It was not a very good feeling. Entering their prime, Utah's new core had already achieved a lot in the regular season, but they had suffered the full range of playoff despair. And thanks to these folks, there was more to come. Between 1991 and 96, the Jazz lost to each of these teams twice, once each in the conference finals, once each in an earlier round. And they alternated almost making the finals with not even coming close. Weird times. The first problem was Portland. In 90-91, the Jazz added another Malone, Jeff Malone, no relation, sent John and Karl to yet another All-Star game, got a great year from longtime Jazz man Thurl Bailey, won 54 games, and got revenge on the Suns in the first round. But remember this guy? This guy was waiting. Clyde Drexler and the number 1 seed Blazers smacked Utah out of the second round, though it was closer than it looked. After Portland dominated Game 1 at home, the Jazz made a huge Game 2 comeback, creating a last-second chance to seize home court advantage. The Blazers led big in the fourth, but the mailman rallied Utah with 20 points in the period, including some super clutch free throws. In the final seconds of a miraculously tied game, this Drexler pass found its way through Mike Brown's fingertips to Terry Porter inside, and Porter's bucket ended up being the difference once Stockton missed a tough buzzer beater. So close, but almost wasn't enough. The Blazers staved off another near comeback in Game 4, then took the series at home in 5. On to next year. Utah bolstered their front court, adding rookie forward David Benoit, and boldly traded the beloved Thurl Bailey for the younger Tyrone Corbin. It was a great season. The Jazz won 55 games to top the Midwest Division and secure a playoff 2 seed. They survived a scare from the Clippers in the first round, then took care of Shawn Kemp and the Seattle Supersonics in the second round. Shawn would remember this. But for the time being, there in 1992, the Jazz had finally broken through to the Western Conference Finals for the first time in franchise history. Waiting for them was the 1 seed, the Blazers, again. The first 4 games were pretty straightforward. Terry Porter fueled 2 Blazer home wins. Karl Malone fueled 2 Jazz home wins. That made Game 5 of this 7-game series pivotal, but the Jazz were shorthanded. Benoit, who'd been promoted to the starting lineup during the playoffs, left the team after the death of his father. Utah's lineup got even thinner at the first half buzzer when Drexler's flailing left hand bonked Stockton so hard in the eyeball that it ended the Utah point guard's night. Ball handling duties in one of the most important halves in Jazz history thus fell to Delaney Rudd, a career journeyman on the fringe of the playoff rotation. And this came close to being the Delaney Rudd game. Both Karl and Jeff Malone shot well, and Ty Corbin had the game of his life off the bench. Rudd was moving the ball well. With seconds remaining and Utah down 3, Delaney Rudd called his own number and did the damn thing.
Three-pointer! Oh my! Right down the middle!
His clutch three-pointer sent the game to OT, where Utah had a prime opportunity to pull ahead on the road. They blew it. After the teams went back and forth a bit, Blazer big man Kevin Duckworth hit one of his pretty floaters for a 3-point lead. Drexler attacked the rack to make it 5, and Duckworth unfurled more silk to make it 7. I love that shot so much. Anyway, Rick Adelman's club didn't look back. The shorthanded, demoralized Jazz couldn't even push the series back to Portland. They lost at home in Game 6. Still, a trip to the 92 conference finals was something to build off, perhaps a stepping stone toward a deeper run in 93. Didn't happen. John and Karl had career years, and in fact were named co-MVPs of the All-Star game. But Mark Eaton was slowing down because of injuries, Utah's defense slipped, and things got particularly bad after the All-Star break. So bad that team owner Larry Miller felt compelled to squash rumors that Sloan's job might be on the line. Utah trudged into the 1993 playoffs with just 47 wins, but they did take a 2-1 lead in their first-round series against the favored Sonics. Game 4 in Utah could have closed out a series upset. Instead, the Jazz collapsed in the second half and couldn't climb back into it because of this guy again. Eddie Johnson, now a Sonic, commanded the final 5 minutes. This and one gave Seattle a 12-point lead. This 3 just about iced the game, and this strange bucket to go up 17 was just unnecessarily rude. Johnson scored 10 of Seattle's final 13 points, although let's not forget Utah's self-inflicted wounds. Sam Perkins certainly didn't. After Utah missed not 1, not 2, but holy shit, 3 point-blank shots on this critical possession, Perkins just stood over Mike Brown, pointing and taunting. Perkins was a problem all series, and he led a Sonic comeback in the decisive Game 5. This 3 over the bigger, slower, ill-equipped Eaton cut a Utah lead to 4. This one cut it to 3, this cut it to 2. And that was all the momentum the Sonics needed. They pulled ahead and held on to deny the series upset. So after coming pretty close to the NBA Finals in '92, the Jazz were a first-round loser in '93. They'd yet to battle Michael Jordan's Bulls, who'd been crushing all Western challengers. But Jordan's 1993 retirement to play baseball suspended the Chicago dynasty, opening a window for some Western team to make it all the way. Utah management pursued that open window with help for John and Karl. They traded for young big man Felton Spencer, who would assume a substantial role as back injuries sidelined Eaton for good. Utah also snagged Tom Chambers off the Suns for some bench help and made a big deadline trade, swapping their other Malone for a different Jeff. With Jeff Hornacek, Utah finished the season hot, entered the 1994 playoffs a 5 seed, and beat David Robinson's Spurs in the first round. Utah's series win set up a likely rematch with the Sonics, the NBA's best regular season team. But in an astounding upset, the 8-seed Denver Nuggets knocked Seattle out of the picture. Utah's path suddenly became much clearer. They shot out to a 3-0 lead versus Denver. They proceeded to blow that entire lead but held on in Game 7, advancing to the Western Conference Finals, back in the mix. But now the Jazz had to face a new boss. The Houston Rockets had nearly choked away their second-round series against Charles Barkley's Suns, but they survived because Hakeem Olajuwon was indomitable. Hakeem and Kenny Smith led Houston to an easy Game 1 victory at home against the Jazz. Game 2 was closer, but on the same night he accepted the MVP trophy, Olajuwon handily won a shootout with Malone. Without the gigantic Eaton to at least attempt guarding Olajuwon one-on-one, the Jazz front court sounded haunted. Spencer was actively soliciting suggestions for how to stop the guy. It felt like it would take divine intervention to overcome Hakeem's supremacy that spring, and the Jazz kinda actually got some, they just wasted it. In Salt Lake City for Game 3, Olajuwon went cold and the Jazz role players made it a 2-1 series. Malone played Game 4 ill and the Jazz fell behind early, but Stockton and Hornacek piloted a huge comeback, and facing a narrow deficit in the final seconds, Stockton really dialed up the Stockton. First, he buried a corner 3 to cut Houston's lead to 2 with 13 seconds left. Then, on the ensuing inbound, the veteran tangled with rookie Houston guard Sam Cassell and fell to the ground convincingly enough that Cassell got called for an offensive foul. Utah ball, down 2 with time to spare. Speaking of time to spare, here comes the divine intervention. Watch the clock. So the Jazz inbound with 13.5 seconds on the clock. Hornacek dribbles and dishes to Malone, who whips it cross court to Humphries, and if you pause it real quick, the clock still hasn't started. By the time it does, Chambers thinks time is running out and rushes an ugly shot in traffic. The Rockets chase down the rebound and dribble out a clock that should have expired a while ago, and that's it. The Jazz were blessed with the most egregious of home cooking, but they just got confused, squandered their chance to tie the series, then complained they didn't get a foul call on top of the unearned extra time. Houston owned Game 5 at home, won the series, and went on to win the '94 championship. Oh well, Jordan's too little too late return made 1995 another opportunity for the West to win a championship. The Jazz felt it would be their year. You could tell because their team slogan was, "It's our year." And they played like it on both ends, logging their first ever 60-win season despite Spencer's season-ending Achilles tear in January. That injury would leave 37-year-old James Donaldson to guard Olajuwon whenever Utah ended up rematching the Rockets, which surprisingly was the first round. The Rockets were coming off a bumpy season. They lost more than expected, even after a big midseason trade for Olajuwon's old college teammate. Yup, that's Clyde Drexler. Houston entered the postseason a shorthanded 6th seed, got further shorthanded during the series, and looked genuinely vulnerable when the Jazz owned Game 3 in Houston to take a 2-1 lead. The old Phi Slamma Jamma pals combined for 81 points to win Game 4, which sent the series back to Utah for Game 5. The favored Jazz just needed one home win to get revenge and eliminate the reigning champs. And things were looking good early. Hornacek ended the first half of Game 5 with one wild 3, then another wilder 3 to build a 7-point lead and so much momentum. Utah increased that edge to 10 in the fourth quarter. But then it was Hakeem time. For over 4 minutes in which the Jazz stars fell silent, Olajuwon led Houston on a 10-0 run, finishing on an elegant baseline banker to put Houston up 3 under the 2-minute mark. The Rockets held that lead, then fouled on purpose in the closing seconds to put Stockton on the line for 2 shots down 3. The tactic worked as Houston rebounded his deliberate miss. Our year ended in a first-round loss. Conference Finals, first-round loss. Conference Finals, first-round loss. Only one thing to do in '96. The Jazz added a few useful pieces, won 55 games, overcame the Blazers in the first round, outlasted the Spurs in the second round, and made it back to the Western Conference Finals. More even-year magic. This time they'd have to face the Sonics again, in a sorta undercard to the Jordan vs. Shaq Eastern Finals. It didn't start so hot. Stockton was hurting, and Seattle's elite defense swallowed Utah whole in Game 1. The Jazz kept Game 2 much closer, but in the final minutes, their stars looked overmatched. Gary Payton cooked Stockton to build a late Seattle lead. Shawn Kemp overpowered Malone to maintain that lead, then did it again. With seconds left and a win still very much on the table, Stockton panicked against a Payton-Perkins double team and threw the ball straight to Kemp. Utah looked great at home for Game 3, but Game 4 came down to a double-digit comeback and, well, Malone shot just 3 of 8 from the free throw line, including this late miss that would have pulled Utah within 1 in the final 2 minutes. The Jazz defense bought their offense more chances, but Stockton overthrew an entry to Malone, then drew iron on a 3-pointer that would have won the game at the buzzer. This was a grouchy week of Jazz basketball, one in which Malone compared his teammates to kids and wished aloud he could get in their heads to say, "What are you thinking?" But Utah rallied. Stockton was really dragging because of a variety of injuries, but came up with this huge steal to secure a victory in overtime of Game 5 in Seattle. Malone outplayed Kemp with some massive numbers to win Game 6 at home in a blowout. Thus, another Jazz season, and this time a long-awaited trip to the NBA Finals, came down to a do-or-die game. And once again, its conclusion balanced on clutch plays and free throws. Stockton ensured a close finish by punctuating his best, gutsiest game of the series with this floater to cut Seattle's lead to 1 with 90 seconds left. Kemp hit some free throws, but Brian Russell found Malone to cut it back to 1. Kemp hit some free throws again, then a gorgeous Stockton-Malone pick and roll drew a Kemp foul with 8 seconds left. Malone needed 2 makes to cut the margin back to 1, keep pace with Kemp, and overcome the bad foul shooting narrative that lingered from Game 4. He'd hit 6 of his 10 free throws in the game. On number 11, Still in it though, as long as Malone hit the second one, oh no. Seattle rebound, game over, series over. The Sonics advanced to the finals where, oh, right, he's back. So yeah, over a 6-year stretch of the 90s that included 2 mostly Jordan-less seasons, Stockton and Malone never even made it out of the West. In their next chapter, they'd finally do it, only to face MJ and the reformed Bulls powerhouse. But Michael's 5th and 6th rings weren't inevitable. This little era, the beginning of the Mountain jerseys, was probably peak Jazz. In their mid-30s, Stockton became a truly elite shooter and Malone became an MVP and All-NBA defender. Sloan had as deep a rotation as ever, including a developing center in Greg Ostertag, the motherfucking big dog, aka Antoine Carr, and a couple guys who could at least try to guard Jordan. Brian Russell, who grew into a full-time starter, and a scrappy rookie named Shandon Anderson. Utah owned the West in '97, winning a franchise record 64 games, swiftly dispatching both LA franchises, then finally getting the clutch play they needed in the Western Conference Finals against the Rockets. Eddie goddamn Johnson did it to Utah again with the three-pointer that won Game 4 and tied the series, but the biggest shot of Stockton's career broke a Game 6 tie at the buzzer to send Utah to the finals and spark this celebration over a decade in the making. So, the 1997 NBA Finals. The Bulls' 4-2 series victory included 3 very close wins with iconic moments that totally could have gone the other way. Game 1 in Chicago is famous because Jordan hit a game winner over Brian Russell. Not the game winner over Brian Russell you're thinking of, but a game winner. That shot eclipsed what came before it. This Malone up and under had put the Jazz up 1 with 90 seconds left. Jordan missed his shot to get the Bulls the lead, but Ron Harper rebounded it to get Scottie Pippen this three-pointer. Even then, Stockton responded to put the Jazz back up 1, and Jordan missed an important free throw that left the game tied. Malone went to the line himself, needing just a point to break that tie, but pooped his pants yet again, and boom, Michael made everyone forget his own misses. Utah eventually tied the finals 2-all. Malone made it happen at the line, but MJ pulled the Bulls ahead in the series with his famous flu game. 38 brilliant points despite a debilitating stomach infection. But the flu game easily could have been a loss. Hornacek could have hit this late 3 to tie it. After Stockton got fouled rebounding that miss, he could have hit the first, then intentionally missed to set up a miraculous tip-in for OT, but Stockton missed the first one. No bueno. And Chicago's Game 6 closeout is famous because Steve Kerr, who'd struggled all series, buried the tie-breaking game-winning jumper off a kick-out from Jordan. Well, that game was tied in the first place because seconds before, Anderson had whiffed a point-blank finish. And Kerr's shot was the winner because seconds after, down 2 points, Russell threw an inbound pass to nobody. That did it. Our guys had a better chance of dethroning the Bulls in '98. The Jazz had home court advantage and were way better rested than a banged-up Chicago team that had narrowly won a 7-game Eastern Final versus the Pacers. Stockton excelled, and Pippen missed a buzzer beater in OT of Game 1, so Utah held serve early. They might have kept it that way if Malone didn't go so cold in Game 2. The mailman's final brick could have tied the game with 23 seconds left. Over in Chicago, Utah could have stolen back a road win to retie the series if not for this strange Game 4 ending. With Chicago up 2, MJ missed a potential dagger, but Malone and Dennis Rodman's wrestling match for the rebound, as opposed to their actual wrestling match, drew a whistle on Karl. A career 60% free throw shooter canned both to keep the Jazz at arm's length. Even the legendary Game 6, which concluded with the Jordan shot over Brian Russell, could have gone the other way. Just seconds before Jordan's final shot as a Bull, Stockton had hit a huge 3 to go up 3, and Malone had a chance to restore that lead before he let Michael snatch it away. We have a whole rewinder about this and how Utah would have been favored in Game 7, but the point is this. After years spent falling short in the West because of free throws and late game mishaps, John and Karl had 2 very real chances to punch holes in Michael Jordan's legacy. They fell short not just because of Michael, but because of free throws and late game mishaps. And they never made it back to the finals, at least not together. Malone had one last ring chase with the Lakers, but he was hurt a lot and the Pistons swatted LA in the finals. So Karl Malone and John Stockton retired ringless. To leave it at that oversimplifies their unbelievably successful careers. Each was a statistical marvel. Together, they played nothing but winning seasons. This legendary duo would surely trade that unparalleled consistency for even one title, but there's no shame in the way things went. For the better part of a decade, nearly every genuine contender had to get past Stockton and Malone at some point. As far as NBA championships go, these two were the greatest to never do it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to SB Nation if you want updates when we have new videos coming out. If you like this video, then you probably like 90s NBA, so I think you would enjoy this one. YouTube thinks you'd like this one, so you tell me in the comments whether you trust me or the algorithm.